the frozen silence of northeastern China, the winter winds cut through the abandoned fields of Manchuria like whispers from another time. Beneath this barren land once stood a facility so shrouded in secrecy, so drenched in human suffering, that even today, its name is spoken with fear. A place where science lost its soul, where ethics were erased, where thousands entered and almost none returned. Tonight, we uncover the story the world tried to bury, a story hidden under ashes, classified files, and silent witnesses. This is the tale of Japan's most horrifying wartime secret, a tale no history book ever fully tells. In the early 1930s, Japan sought dominance in East Asia. After invading Manchuria, the Imperial Army realized war would require more than bullets and bombs. They wanted a weapon that could not be seen, could not be blocked, and could wipe out entire populations without risking their own troops. So a secret division was formed, the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. A harmless name, a perfect disguise. Behind that name, however, stood one man, General Shiro Ishii, a brilliant but dangerously ambitious microbiologist. Ishii believed biological warfare would shape the future of combat, and he wanted Japan to lead that future. With nearly unlimited funding and absolute military authority, Ishii created a research complex the size of a small city, a fortress of laboratories, barracks, crematoriums, and underground chambers. Locals simply called it the White Fortress. What they didn't know was that it would become a factory of nightmares. To keep the facility secret, Ishii introduced a chilling code word. Prisoners brought into Unit 731 weren't people. They weren't subjects. They were Maruta logs. The story claimed that the compound was a lumber mill, and new logs were constantly being delivered. Trucks carrying Chinese civilians, Korean prisoners, Soviet captives, and even political dissidents arrived every week bound, blindfolded, unaware they were entering a place no one ever exited. This dehumanization wasn't just symbolic, it was systematic. If you convince a soldier that the person in front of him isn't human, then anything becomes possible. Once inside, the prisoners were divided down dark corridors. Some were taken to pathogen chambers, others to frostbite rooms, some to pressure chambers, and others to operating theaters. On metal tables under cold lamps, doctors in white coats gathered like curious students, watching the human body as it succumbed to unimaginable experiments, vivisections, dissections performed while the victim was fully conscious, were routine. No anesthetic, no painkillers. Because Ishii believed anesthesia distorted test results. Victims were exposed to plague-infested fleas injected with syphilis and anthrax, forced to drink contaminated water, locked inside gas chambers to test chemical reactions, strapped to stakes while bombs filled with bacteria exploded nearby. One survivor said, "They treated us like insects." No, worse. Even insects are allowed to live. Most victims died screaming. The few who survived the experiments were killed and dissected anyway. Manchuria's brutal winters offered Ishii the perfect conditions for frostbite research. The goal was to discover a soldier's breaking point and how to treat frozen limbs on the battlefield. Prisoners were tied outside in temperatures below -20 degrees Celsius. Doctors poured water over their arms and legs until the skin froze solid. When the flesh was completely numb, the doctors hit the limbs with wooden sticks. If the sound resembled a board striking ice, the frostbite was considered successful. Then came the treatment trials, thawing with fire, boiling water, or simply smashing the frozen limb. Each attempt was documented with clinical precision, as if the person suffering was nothing more than a biological puzzle. Ishii's ultimate goal was to create the perfect biological weapon, one that could cripple entire armies and spill into cities undetected. Unit 731 mass-produced plague-carrying fleas, releasing them over Chinese villages via ceramic bombs dropped from aircraft. Within days, entire towns fell to catastrophic outbreaks. They created anthrax-laced food, contaminated wells with cholera, released typhus into civilian populations, no battlefield, no military target, just unsuspecting men, women, and children living ordinary lives until invisible death swept through their streets. Estimates suggest that over 200,000 civilians died from these biological attacks. Casualties that were never admitted, never counted, never mourned officially. In 1945, as Japan faced defeat, the truth began to unravel. Soviet forces marched toward Manchuria. The fortress of Unit 731 trembled. Ishii ordered a full-scale cover-up. Laboratories were burned, documents incinerated, prisoners executed, and the entire compound left in ruins. Witnesses recall the smoke rising for days as if the ground itself was trying to erase its memories. When the Soviets arrived, all they found were ashes, bones, and silence. But the story didn't end here. After the war, many expected Ishii and his doctors to stand trial for their crimes, just as Nazi scientists had in Europe. But that never happened. Instead, something far darker occurred. The United States, now preparing for the Cold War, realized the value of Ishii's research. No matter how horrific its origins, American intelligence secretly negotiated with the Unit 731 scientists. In exchange for complete immunity, Ishii handed over thousands of pages of experimental data produced through torture, through murder, through suffering beyond imagination. And just like that, the doctors of Unit 731 walked free. Many went on to have prestigious medical careers. Some became professors, hospital directors, even celebrated researchers. Justice never came, not for the victims, not for the families, not for history. Today, remnants of Unit 731 still lie buried beneath the soil of Harbin. Rusted scalpels, broken restraints, burned foundations. The Japanese government officially acknowledged the existence of Unit 731 only decades later, and even then details remain locked away in classified archives, but the ghosts remain. In the testimonies of survivors, in the fading memories of witnesses, in the lingering fear carried by generations. Unit 731 was not just a facility, it was a wound, one the world tried to cover but never healed. And in that darkness, one truth echoes. When science loses conscience, humanity becomes the experiment. Deep within the underground wing of Unit 731 stood a room that even soldiers feared to approach. A sealed steel chamber, the high-pressure room. Here, doctors studied how much atmospheric pressure a human body could endure before it ruptured. Victims were strapped to a metal chair as the pressure slowly increased. At first, their ears bled, then their lungs, then their eyes. Soldiers operating the controls reported hearing screams turn into gargles, then silence, followed by a thunderous pop as organs collapsed inward. Each test was carefully documented: pulse rate, lung volume, time of death. Not for mercy, not for treatment, but for data. To the doctors, these were necessary military studies. To history, they remain proof of how far human cruelty can go when morality is stripped away. Few people know that Unit 731 built the largest plague fleas factory in world history. Inside long, humid chambers, millions of infected fleas were cultivated in cages stacked from floor to ceiling. The buzzing filled the halls like a living storm. Technicians wearing thick gloves removed trays of infected rats. Rats intentionally infected with the Black Death fleas fed on them until they swelled with bacteria. Then came the true horror. Ceramic bombs engineered to release these fleas over villages. Bombs that didn't explode violently. They cracked open in midair, scattering plague across neighborhoods, markets, and farms. Entire towns became laboratories. Every outbreak was a field test. These experiments created pandemics so vicious that even Japanese soldiers were sometimes caught in the plague zones, silent casualties of a weapon their own army had unleashed. Unit 731 wasn't only about biological weapons, it was also a stage for brutal psychological studies. Prisoners were isolated in pitch-black rooms for weeks, others were forced to stand motionless for days under threat of execution. Some were told their families had been captured, whether true or not, just to observe emotional collapse. One experiment involved placing two prisoners in separate rooms and telling each that the other would be executed because of them. Doctors recorded their reactions: panic, guilt, breakdown, hysteria. This wasn't research for treatment. This was research for control. The aim was simple: discover how to break a human mind and how to use fear as a weapon on the battlefield. These studies were never published, but their shadows continue to haunt modern psychological warfare research. Few outside China know the story of the Unit 731 train line, a short railway built only for transporting prisoners from surrounding regions into the facility. Locals called it the one-way line. The train arrived with dozens of shackled civilians and always returned empty. Women, children, resistance fighters, farmers, anyone suspected of disloyalty were loaded onto wooden boxcars under the guise of relocation. Some realized too late where the train was heading. Others never understood at all. A former soldier later confessed, "The silence on the return trip was the loudest sound I ever heard." The railway was destroyed when the war ended, but old tracks still lie hidden in the forest, rusted traces of a journey that had no survival. Unit 731 stands today as a silent monument, not to power, not to knowledge, but to the unimaginable cost of forgetting our humanity. The past is not dead, it is not even past. Fade to black.